but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we are showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make a decision.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because we happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having Mary Wars doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Hello there. Hello everybody, good evening, and evening Blake. I did that at an event the other day. Somebody came up to me and they recognized me and they mentioned that I love the way that you start your videos, because they were a big sci-fi nerd, and so I was like, what do you mean when I go hello there? And she just sat there going it was actually the cutest thing. It was adorable.
So people recognize you for your catchphrase?
Well, I think it was the right crowd. It was the retro fair last weekend up here on the North Shore, and I don't know if people can tell, but I do like my nerdy stuff. So I think it was just right place, right time more than anything. But yes, it was very cute to have somebody do that. It's adorable. It makes me feel seen.
Speaking of which, we may have some nerdy stuff coming up next week, but we'll talk about that at the end of the show. Right now, we're going to show you a interview that we filmed earlier this week with Carolyn Young from the New Zealand retail sector. Now, a quick note about this video, because I know we've got some people from different disability community that do watch. Unfortunately, my file decided not to save, so there are some...
It was corrupted. You're corrupting things without even trying.
There are some wide shots in this interview, so we apologise for that. For anyone.
So Carolyn is the CEO of Retail NZ, which is an organisation that represents retail organisations or retail companies, from your corner dairy all the way through to your big box retailers. This was a really fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed this chat a lot more than I was expecting to, and I learned a lot more than I was expecting to from it. So it was very, very cool. Before I press the play button, just a couple of very quick things, housekeeping things. Running a poll on the YouTube page at the moment, on my YouTube page at the moment, just asking if people are surprised at the 90% opposition rate to the Treaty Principles Bill that was revealed today. 308,000 submissions and 90% opposed the bill itself. So feel free to jump over there and do the poll at the moment. With just 5 votes, it's 100%. Nobody was surprised by that one. Also, don't forget, if you are a paid-up YouTube member, these interviews are now available online. You can watch them at any time, and they'll become open to the public over the next couple of days, along with this week's The News. But we should jump into this first interview. Anything else to add before I press any more buttons?
Just that I was not shocked at David Seymour's response. That he still...
I'm Māori and I don't feel oppressed or something like that?
No, he's still convinced that the bill's got a chance because it's only a small minority that submit, he says.
Well, master negotiator that the Prime Minister is, who knows what will happen? But at least the public have had a chance to have their say, and they will be heard, which is also really important.
But on that note, here, Carolyn Young.
Yeah, let's jump in, press the big buttons and make it all work.
We are in a testing time for the retail sector with the ability to have citizens arrest laws coming into society, possibly. Here to talk more about that is CEO of Retail NZ. It's Carolyn Young. Welcome, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Kia ora, Blake. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
So let's touch on those proposed citizens arrest laws. What were your thoughts when Minister Goldsmith proposed those? And are you supportive of them?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is that there is a citizens arrest law in place at the moment, which is enacted between 9 p.m. at night and 6 a.m. in the morning. So you can do a citizens arrest. It is relatively restricted. What has been proposed is much more liberal and has quite a number of risks and dangers with it. It enables any member of the public to undertake a citizen's arrest if they see someone that they think is performing an offence. They can use reasonable force to do so, and they're able to detain someone. So there's a couple of things with that. In a broad statement, members generally don't support citizens' arrest for a number of reasons. Firstly, we don't want shopkeepers don't want to have that kind of unsettlement in their store. They don't want people having a little bit of rough housing or anything like that happening in store. If someone is offending in their store, they do want to get them out and they want to be able to get their goods back, and they want to be able to trespass them, but they don't want to be able to detain them because they've got nowhere to do that. You don't want someone in handcuffs out the front of your building because it puts off other people coming in. And you also don't have anywhere in store that you want to put them, because if you put them out the back, then they're going to see what sits out the back and they'll get some ideas about breaking in out the back. Alongside that, a lot of people that are offending in store these days bring in weapons. Some are concealed and some are not. So if you approach someone, you're never sure what response you might get, whether they might pull out a knife. A number of occasions, guns have been presented in store in the last 12 to 18 months. So it is a much more dangerous environment that we're talking about. And a number of offenders also have a number of addictions. So they might be high on meth or some other things. And so you don't know how they might respond. And you're probably not going to get a normal response. Someone that's in an offending space is probably not going to give you the response that you would think would be reasonable. And so it's really tricky. And the key thing really about citizens arrest is that if you're asking your staff to undertake a citizens arrest, you're putting them in known danger. So you're saying to your staff, I want you to interact if you see something going wrong in store. It doesn't comply to the health and safety regulations where you're required to provide a safe work environment for your staff members, so that they should be able to come to work and go home and not be impacted negatively by their work environment. So, all of those reasons, it's not really a retail solution. Citizens arrest can be done by anyone, anywhere, anytime. So it could be done in a domestic situation. It could be done at a concert. It could be done at a sporting event. It could be done out on the street. Any number of places it could be done. And it could be done in a retail store, but it is not a retail solution for retail crime. And it's not a preventative mechanism. And they're probably the key things for us, really, is keeping staff safe, looking at preventative measures rather than post measures. And we know that the police are really stretched in the work that they do, and it's really difficult for them to turn up to retail crime if it's just about shoplifting. So you've got a tool that someone's going to put in place, but there's no guarantee that the police will turn up. they have a wide range of other priorities where lives are in danger that they need to attend to first, and we understand that. So I think, if you're putting a tool in place, you need to know that it's going to be effective for the purpose that it's been derived for.
Then with all that, we've seen a lot of media conjecture around what the police are doing in retail and other places in the last week or so. So what improvements would you like to see the police make in the retail space, given the comments from places like the Green Party and other political organisations over the last week or so?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite contentious, right, what Tabitha Paul from the Green Party had said. We really support the work the police do and have done and continue to do. We know that they've got a really tough job. Retailers feel more safe and secure when there are police out on the beat as opposed to them being in the police station, because we know that it's a preventative measure. If people are thinking about offending and there's a couple of police officers walking down the road, or they've just seen some around the corner, they might think twice because they know that they'll be able to respond much sooner. So it provides a greater comfort to a retailer and customers that police are out, they're visible, they're there to protect society.
I'll hand over to Paul.
Out of curiosity, the retail sector has obviously had a really tough sort of half a decade with COVID and lockdowns, and then you sort of get back and the world seems to be going a little bit crazy. Is there a feeling of pessimism out there amongst the sector at the moment, or is it turning? Are we looking at a more optimistic outlook for people within the sector?
Yeah, look, Paul, it's been really tough, as you say, and it is quite tricky. So retailers are hoping that there's a bit more hope and optimism that things later in the year will improve. But right now we're kind of still in the deep, dark difficulties of low trade. Sales are still down on the previous year, which are down on the previous year. So, we've had all of these years of difficulty. We're still seeing stores close. There's a lot of talk about what the economy's going to be like soon. And really it's about how businesses can hang on, how they can be agile right now, what they need to do to adjust their priorities and what they sell and how they sell to a changing marketplace. And so there's a combination of people being optimistic about the future, but realistic that right now it's really tough. And trying to work out how do I get through from now until July, August, September time.
When we go through a recession like we've just come out of, we tend to see those crime rates go up a little bit. There's a bit of a hand-in-hand issue going on there, which, right at the tail end of the last recession was when Paul Goldsmith got up and made his announcement. Is there a correlation in your mind to, the government reacting to what people see as a rise in crime to make this announcement about citizens' arrest, or do you think it's something that's been a little bit more planned out and it's just the timing might be come across as coincidental more than anything?
Well, we saw an uplift in crime post-COVID, when we came out of lockdown, and that's just continued on. So it has been a continuous sort of piece. And so, yes, it coincides at a time when there's been a recession, but it's actually not related to affordability. So we know that the people committing the crimes, they're not stealing to feed their family, because that's a different person. If someone's stealing to feed their family, they've got a loaf of bread and a pound of butter and a can of beans, a couple of things. They're just taking a few items. When people are stealing trolley loads of things and they're planned and they've got support people, that's organised and that's got a different feel about it. So, retail crime has been on the rise for 3 or 4 years now. It's been an issue with police and justice and, the government in general. We've been talking with them about retail crime. And the answer that this current government has got is that they formed a ministerial advisory group to provide some ideas around solutions, and the change in citizens' arrest has come out of that. the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Group. It's his pet project. It's something that he has been touting to various governments for a number of years, and he feels that it's a solution. I think that, one of the things that we really know about citizens arrest is that when, if you chase after someone, if you have a weapon that you're going to use to try and stop someone, you will get hurt. And we've seen instances where people have died as a result of them chasing after offenders. And that's because the offenders have got weapons. Someone got stabbed and died, and other people have been hit back and those sorts of things. So a little bit in terms of Minister Goldsmith's announcement, it's a bit about their strategy around how to solve and address retail crime, and it's a little bit about just the timing of where things come out.
How much of a concern is it when you hear citizens arrest powers, all that kind of stuff, and somebody like Brian Tamaki comes in and goes, this is really good for us?
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it? If people take on that sort of strategy that they think, oh, great, we can kind of get in there and go and do something ourselves. That's not what we want, right? We're a progressive society. We want to really think about how we want to get on with each other in our community, make sure that we're accepting of all people. And I think when you've got sectors of the community that are not accepting of everyone, and they take an aggressive and at times a violent approach to addressing those issues in a really disruptive manner and not a courteous manner, I think it's a real concern. He did come out a bit later and saying he was only joking, but it's, first responses sometimes are the response that you really look back to see, what someone's really thinking.
He's very good at turning around afterwards and saying, oh, this is what I actually meant.
It's sort of almost like a cover-up. It's sort of like he sort of doesn't realise how he's come across, so then he has to correct it, but actually his position probably still hasn't changed.
Yeah. Changing tact ever so slightly, I want to have a chat about paywave fees, because I see that's been making the news a little bit lately as well. Banks charge a little bit more per transaction fee, and it makes sense that retailers pass that on. But they're not popular. I know fees are ever popular. I'm kind of curious what the Retail NZ position is on what they would like to see happen around that area.
Yeah, look, it's a super complex space, right? Because the merchant payment fee is a fee that anyone that has let's call it an EFTPOS terminal, because it makes most people understand what that means. If you've got an EFTPOS terminal, you're called a merchant, and those merchant fees, they're made up about 5 or 6 different fees accumulated in there that merchants have to pay. So the Commerce Commission at the moment is undergoing some consultation around what that space looks like. Our position effectively is that the current legislation allows retailers or any merchant to charge a surcharge to recover the fee that they're paying that is being charged by the banks and the credit card companies. And so we support retailers having the ability to choose if they want to charge that fee. And there's a little bit of a difference between hospitality and retail. So we did a survey of our members, and we found that 24.6% of members charge a surcharge, and therefore, 75.4% don't. And hospitality is probably the other way around. We know when we go out to a cafe, most cafes, if you get a coffee or lunch or something, they charge a surcharge, and it's in they have a different strategy. So really what we want to see, the Commerce Commission is really keen to get the fee for merchants down to 1% or lower. And they have come out with some quite strong recommendations in some parts of that merchant service fee called the interchange. And they're wanting to regulate that piece. And so that will make a difference for everyone. And we agree with what they're trying to do, but one of the things that we say is that they need to go further. They should regulate the total fee. If they believe that they want the fee to be less than 1%, they should regulate the maximum fee that can be charged, because we believe that, as big business is able to do, that over time, those fees will just creep back up and we'll be back to where we are right now. So we are supportive of the Commerce Commission's recommended changes of reducing the fees and regulating more. They are going to put some stronger regulations in around surcharging. We've suggested that they do that at the same time. At this stage, they're looking to do it as an additional piece later, so maybe next year or at some point. So the one thing we know about surcharging, it's not a great customer experience, right? When you get to the till, you're excited about what you're going to buy, and the next thing you know, you're having to pay an additional, 1.5%, 2.5%, sometimes more. And that's just doesn't feel quite right. But, retailers and merchants are entitled to charge a surcharge to recoup that fee. So it's a very complicated space. And it's a very complex area, and small businesses don't have the ability to negotiate with banks because they don't have the buying power like the really big guys do. So they're a price taker, not a price maker. And so they're just absorbing all of these fees. And if the fees go up, they can't negotiate. If they can't try and go somewhere else, it's probably pretty much the same. So it's a really tough place for SMEs. And we know that in New Zealand, there's lots and lots, there's 27,000 retailers in New Zealand, and the majority of those are small and medium-sized enterprises. So they're the ones that are really struggling and really hurting.
Blake, I'll pass back to you.
One final question from me before we let you go. So you talk about the surcharges and paywave and all that kind of stuff. As a disabled person, I've noticed a high increase in people not even offering paywave, and it can become quite an issue for our disabled community because some of us don't, most of us do, but there are a portion of us who don't have the luxury of having a caregiver to support us. So we rely a lot on, I don't have the issue, but I have a lot of clientele that do, that have the issue that they're not able to use a card by themselves and need to rely on paywave. So for the businesses that don't, are you trying to encourage them to offer paywave?
Look, it is a really important question that you raised, because it is incredibly important that the whole society are able to make payments in a way in which they want to make payments. So if somebody wants to pay with cash, we want to make sure that merchants or that businesses will accept cash. A number of hospitality businesses don't take cash anymore. So, but that is a way, and it's a legal tender. It's a way in which a lot of people transact businesses. For people with a disability, as you mentioned, if you're vision impaired or if you've got an intellectual disability, sometimes you'll be reliant on other people to make that transaction on your behalf. And I think it is really important that, Payments New Zealand is going through a review of the current infrastructure that we have. And one of the pieces that they're looking at is how to make sure that the whole community, including those with a disability and an impairment, will be able to have trust and confidence in the system and enable them to make a payment in a way that's effective and efficient for them. So there are some measures being looked at the moment. The wheels move a little bit slowly, Blake, but certainly really fully understand the challenges that you have if you have an impairment, whether it's a visual impairment, a physical impairment, or an intellectual impairment. I think it's really important that everyone in the community is looked after.
Well, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to speak with you about retail and all those sorts of things, and you're welcome back anytime.
Kia ora, Blake and Paul. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been great fun talking to you. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you. Stupid muted mic. I'm going to stop it there because I've used the video files that I've uploaded onto YouTube.
Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.
Or anything like that happening in store. If someone...
So many buttons. Right. How do you feel about that now that you've had a couple of days to sit on it?
Let's try that again. So, yeah. I just want to make a few points around the last question I asked. So, we've actually got the head of the Commerce Commission coming on next week as part of next week's show, so that'll be a great follow-on from our conversation. Now, I don't normally share what we talk about off camera, but I am going to share a bit of this because it's context. We did talk to Carolyn after we filmed that piece about how I could help them to do some advocacy around paywave, and they are open to talking. So I'm in talks with it at the moment, and I'll keep everyone over on my platform, and maybe Paul will do it on this platform as well, how that goes. Because as I mentioned, some of us can only use the tap and go cards or the on your phone, or your wireless wallet or whatever the heck they call it these days. And we'll see where that goes to. It was a really interesting thing that I don't think, and I'm not saying that she hadn't, but I don't think Carolyn had realised that kind of perspective before, and it was really nice to know that she was so open to hearing more about it. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I don't know that there's much more that I can add, to be honest. It was a fascinating conversation. I love the conversations where I learn stuff, and that was definitely one of those. And this next one is also one of those. I had a chance to sit down and catch up with the Honourable Mark Patterson. He's a New Zealand First MP, who is the Minister for Rural Communities and the Associate Minister for Agriculture, and some other third thing, which I'm pretty sure I screw up in the middle of this interview, because I can. I've had a couple of people message me going, how dare you sit down and talk to a member of the government? Which I thought was a really interesting perspective, because I understand some people are not particularly keen to hear from them at all, but I think it's important sometimes to sit down and listen to what they have to say. Rural communities are a big one, and I had this interview itself actually came in about 20 minutes after Donald Trump announced the tariffs that he made during the week. So it was like a really raw reaction, and there was a very clear, oh shit, I don't want to say anything that's going to get the government in trouble from the minister's office on this one. So it was fascinating one to see.
I just want to add a quick thing to your point about that, some people complaining. There are a lot of people who want to hear from both sides that do watch our stuff, believe it or not. So all I would ask is people that are watching, please keep that in mind, that yes, there are a portion of you that don't want to hear from the current administration, and we understand why, because this is a predominantly Labour and Greens focused channel. However, we want to be able to cater to both sides of the political spectrum to a degree. So please keep that in mind, and this is why, we're trying to start to venture into that area.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that a minister inside the government, and don't get me wrong, I make fun of the government all the time, and my regular content is very much targeted against them. But to have a minister actually step up and go, you know what, yes, we will have that conversation. Let's have an honest, adult conversation. I was really grateful for it.
Yeah, so just to foreshadow, he will not be the only one. So please appreciate that.
Yeah, let's see how it goes. Let's see what people think of him at the end of it. All right, let's jump in. Yep, that's the right button. Right button. Right, joining me at the moment, I have the Associate Minister for Agriculture, the Associate Minister for Rural Development? And
Regional
the Minister
Development.
Regional Development. I should make sure I get this one right. And the Minister for Rural Communities, the Honourable Mark Patterson. Thank you very much for joining me today. First question I've got for you is a bit of a left field one. I understand that you have an old woodwork teacher who you now have to sit down and listen to again in the House. Jerry Brownlee was one of your teachers. Is that right?
Yeah, g'day Paul, good to be on. Yes, Jerry was my woodwork teacher back in the day, Mr. Brownlee at Ellesmere College. So he actually gave me the cane once, so I did bring that up in a speech in my previous term in Parliament. Revenge is best served cold, so yeah.
Has he apologised for that, or was there a lot more going on at the time?
Well, his recollection's not quite as clear as mine on that, so I don't like to push it.
That's understandable.
Yeah. No no harm done or no bitterness towards that. He was a character as a woodwork teacher or a teacher in general, as you could imagine, and that really carried on to Parliament.
Yeah. I said, does it feel like you're in school sometimes?
It certainly does. I think school is a bit more disciplined than the Parliament on occasion. And Jerry, when he was a teacher, he was prone to bellowing out and hauling us into line, and he's had to use some of those skills in Parliament as well.
Oh man, who knew that was a transferable job skill from being a teacher? Good to see that it's got a role there. Hey, rural communities being your big portfolio, I'm really keen to have a chat to you about what those issues are that are facing our rural communities and how the government's going about trying to help them. At the moment, while we're talking, there's a big storm hitting a lot of them sort of down in the South Island. The West Coast, I believe, is being impacted. What do you see as being the biggest issues facing our rural communities at the moment?
Well, the role of Rural Communities Minister, we've got a small team within the Ministry for Primary Industries, MPI, that look at, I guess, over whole of government, and we, I guess, rural proofing is the term. So we look at how policies are going to impact rural communities in particular, because government works in silos a little bit at times. So there's a chance that something that's being proposed isn't suitable for rural communities, or there's a cumulative effect where a number of policies coming together actually have a disproportionate impact on rural communities. So it's an advocacy role. I think there's a danger of looking at rural communities as just farming, and of course that's a lot of what we do. That hugely important, and those rural towns are farm servicing towns, but it's important that we look at it in the entirety, and from government services point of view, they've got good healthcare, they've got good connectivity, they've got a police presence, they've got a education, good education, all those things coming together to make viable rural communities. So it's obviously a big challenge. I mean, everything the government does affects rural communities. We've got a small team, so you've got to fight your battles. Probably the ones that I'm fighting at the moment in that broader scope, the healthcare. I'm really concerned about rural healthcare. Obviously, around the entirety of the system, it's under real pressure, but particularly acute in some of our rural communities. And the connectivity stuff as well. And you hit Paul Brislin on, I think, a couple of podcasts ago, talking about exactly that. And this is where things like joined up thinking, like the winding back of the 3G network, the winding up of the copper wire, some adjustments to New Zealand Post, potentially some of the school bus stuff that's happening as well, that each of those things are a separate issue, but cumulatively it's about going to the relevant ministers and saying, actually, this is what it looks like to those constituents on the ground. So that's a bit of a flavour of what we do.
With rural communities, a lot of them are focusing around primary industries, because as you mentioned, they're service areas for people out on farms and working in those areas. The rural sector, or the primary industry sector, is our largest export by a huge amount. How much do you think the changes are that the government's bringing in at the moment around things like resource management changes, climate change mitigation factors, how much is that going to feed through and impact these rural communities?
Yeah, well, agriculture, as you say, does underpin our rural communities, and agriculture is actually on a real up at the moment. So that's really positive, and rural communities feel that first. And we'll see that we're starting to see that flow through into the GDP figures and the like. But some of that spending that starts in the rural communities, so it's good to see that happening again. I guess on the broader issue, it isn't just about farming, though. It's about we want the artists, the entrepreneurs, the small business people that setting up cafes and tourism operations and art studios and that sort of thing, because actually the narrative out there is that rural communities are kind of dying. Well, actually they're not. They're growing again. I think since COVID, a lot of people have been wanting to reassess their life and their values and see a more connection to community that do get in those rural communities. as being important. So it's a matter of making sure we've got those core government services that, so whether you're a farmer or whether you're an artist, that it's, you've got a good place to go in a rural community.
In terms of the growth of rural communities, I read a report the other day that they expect it's 25 years between Auckland and Hamilton becoming one giant megacity. There's obviously a number of rural communities that would fill in that bridge. What are the changing needs for those sort of communities that are seeing so much growth that they're bordering on becoming a much more urbanised area?
Well, that's an excellent question, Paul. In fact, we were in Canterbury the other day at Rolleston, and within 12 years, Rolleston is forecast to be the same size or bigger than Dunedin. So they were going through exactly those issues, and how do you... a lot of it's around the connectivity in terms of transport corridors and how you set them up so that we're not just sitting in gridlock and the like. But we do have to get ahead of some of those. We've got to forecast it out accurately forward, so we're not just doing things in an ad hoc fashion, which I think we've been guilty of in the past in this country. So Rolleston is a place that's going through exactly those issues at the moment.
In terms of those sort of connectivity transport corridors that are there, there's roads of regional significance as one of the big plans for this government for getting those connection sort of points in place. When it comes to building those, they have impacts on those rural communities that they go past and those sort of areas that they service. Do you know how much sort of planning has gone into, look, this is going to impact this community this way, this is going to benefit this community in that way, when it comes to building those kind of connectivity transport areas?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're doing is around the freight hubs, and again, just like on the Rolleston example, they were pitching to us as regional development ministers around a freight hub, which was going to take 60,000 trucks off the road, going to Littleton, aggregating freight from the west coast and further south. So that's the kind of examples of joined up thinking we need. I mean, Kiwi Rail's in the room, they're saying, well, for that to happen, we've got to invest this much in our rail corridor. The next conversation is then around commuter and at what stage does that become viable and how do we work that into future planning.
How much of a change then are you looking at for an area like Rolleston in terms of the economy building of having something like a hub like that there?
All those sort of things are key enablers. So it's not just a hub for freight to get stuff off the road. It's actually then you start to get the manufacturing bases and the cool stores and the like aggregate up around those areas as well. So in terms of, you talked about the carbon thing before, in terms of efficiency and decarbonising processes, they become very, it's a real efficiency metric that helps with some of those challenges. Energy is another one that we have to have a forward look at, how we're going to power some of these industries and communities as they get bigger. So, yeah, it's a lot of joined up thinking required there.
Is that the same for your sort of power infrastructure that you get to your rural communities? I grew up in the middle of the Waikato where, one storm and suddenly you've got no power because there's no backup way of getting the lines through. Is there much future-proofing going on in that area at the moment?
Well, I think you're seeing, like one of the aims of the fast-track legislation is to enable quicker rollout of wind and solar and some of those renewable projects. Obviously had a little bit of a setback down south there a week or two back, so that's not always straightforward. But actually one of the revolutions I think that's coming, it's not necessarily government's got a role to play in this from a regulatory point of view, but the rooftop solar, farms actually are going to become energy exporters, and we're starting to see that sort of leading edge farmers getting into this now, where they're not only providing power for themselves, but they're putting power back into the grids, and that's going to build quite a bit of resilience. The economics of that are starting to become quite compelling. I'm sure you've just about everyone in New Zealand's heard of Mike Casey from Rewiring Aotearoa, who's been a really active lobbyist, him and his group, in just alluding to the opportunities that sit within this to augment the broader power system. So there's not just one answer, but it's enabling a whole lot of answers to come through.
We're a little bit behind when it comes to solar, especially if you duck over the ditch and check out Australia. Everybody seems to have solar panels on their roof. Is that kind of encouragement that Australia has, where I think they were subsidising people with new builds if they put solar on there? Is that something that we could look at rolling out here?
Yeah, well, I think we're about 3% penetration, and they're at 40%. So they're miles. They're at least a decade ahead of us. Obviously, they probably get a bit more sun, so it probably makes it a bit easier. But I think the stuff that Mike's been pitching is around just some of the regulatory stuff. So there's not actually a government subsidy involved. We just have to enable the market to work a bit better and for a fair price to be paid for the power going back into the grid. And there's massive implications for, maybe we don't have to build the massive power lines and pylons and main grid. We could do a lot more of it locally. That's like I've always thought Mike's had some really important things to say, and we've tried to help him amplify his voice here in Parliament.
He's got some brilliant ideas. I had chat to him about 6 months ago, and really, really good ideas, and basically making ourselves less reliant on everybody else and becoming a little bit more self-sufficient in that respect. Speaking of international, though, I'm talking to you on Thursday morning. Donald Trump's announced his what do they call retaliatory tariffs, and put a 10% general tariff on New Zealand imports to the United States. Last year, the US became our second biggest export partner, and the majority of that comes from agriculture, primary industries. I realize it's very, very early days, but is there a general view that you've come across so far about how this might impact our agriculture sector and our rural communities?
Yes, well, as you say, at the time of recording, it's only about half an hour. I've only just headlines myself, so I better be careful in leading the government response here. But obviously, we'll be really disappointed about that. We would have hoped to have escaped that. We have virtually no tariffs ourselves, but we are operating in a dramatically different geopolitical situation. It's sort of unfolding before our eyes. So we're collateral damage as everyone else in this environment. We will have to roll with it in the first instance. In terms of the rural communities and the farming underpinning them, big market for beef, dairy, wine. So $9 billion, I think most of that primary exports. So that's going to have a material impact. The extraordinary part of this is there's a real shortage of beef worldwide, particularly in America. Their herd numbers the lowest in 7 or 80 years. So the beef prices are at a record. So they're just putting another tax on top of that, which will probably flow. Most of it will be paid by the American consumer, I would imagine, because they really need our beef at the moment. So, yeah, it'll be a fluid situation. Hopefully, it'll be something that might be wound back.
Does this offer us opportunities in other markets?
Yeah, well, I guess we don't really want to be seen to be benefiting. That's not the narrative we want. I mean, obviously, we don't want those tariffs to be on in the first place. But yeah, there'll be a reordering of world trade, and if there's reciprocal tariffs go on American product going into the likes of China or the EU, then maybe we pick up some extra business there. So New Zealand exporters have been diversifying their export base over a fair period of time. Actually, ironically, probably gravitating towards the United States. We were pretty reliant on China. I think everyone recognised that was a little bit of a risk to be too top-heavy there, and so they've done a really good job. So I guess we're probably as well prepared as we could be.
In terms of those impacts that are going to come through to those rural communities, I imagine it's not going to be an instant impact, but what sort of long-term impacts might these communities be facing from those increased costs for importing to the States?
Yeah, well, it could have reduction with the immediate start. There could be an immediate reduction in the schedules, which of course impacts farmers' cash flows, and then that flows through. So but it's not actually clear at the moment who's going to bear these costs, because it's actually the importer that pays them. So whether they'll be passed through, New Zealand exporters are in a pretty strong position at the moment. So we'll wait to see. We won't catastrophise this. Obviously, there's a number of other countries that appear to have come off much worse. But yeah, it's concerning, and it's just something we haven't had to deal with for probably 30 years, being in this sort of environment. So maybe more.
Speaking of things that we used to deal with, wool was once our biggest export product. I see, as last weekend, you were head of the muster in Te Kuiti for the running of the sheep. What sort of future do you see for wool as a product for the country, and how it would help our communities?
Yeah, well, I've got a delegation to help revive the wool industry, which I'm very motivated by. It used to underpin our, basically built the country as an economy, as a commodity. And it's an incredible natural fibre. The good news is there is a swing back to natural fibres more broadly. So we are starting to see an uptick in demand, new types of end uses. So it's not just carpet and insulation. So we're starting to see the price come up. It's got a lot further to go, but it was very, very dire for a period of time. In fact, it was a cost. It was costing more to shear the sheep than they were getting in wool returns. But there is a lot of stuff going on. There's some capital coming in. We're doing our bit as government. We've co-invested in a number of sort of startup initiatives. We're going to be making an announcement very shortly around our wool and government buildings policy. So we'll be adding to some demand. That's already happening anecdotally. And so we're throwing the kitchen sink at it, quite literally helping re-establish a wool industry, hopefully bringing a manufacturing base back here too. So we're not just, we're adding value and creating jobs in our regions as well. And the trade deals that we're doing, and particularly potentially with India, is really exciting opportunity for wool as well.
With wool, what is the like natural fibers, all that kind of stuff? What's the impact of that on the environment itself? Is it a low impact type of activity? Because wool is obviously a natural product. You're not paying for, factories to spew out oils and pollutants to produce wool. What kind of environmental impacts are we looking at on growing that industry?
As I said before, wool's actually it's a miracle fibre. It's biodegradable by some measure, and one of the key metrics is its carbon neutrality, and by some measure carbon negative. There's growing concern around microplastics. The synthetic products often have these PFAS toxic chemicals that are needed to treat them, so wool doesn't need that. It's non-allergenic. It's there's a laundry list of properties that wool has that you just could not design synthetically. And it's starting to get on consumers' radars. They're looking for these types of products. A stat I heard the other day: 148,000 tonnes of carpet goes into landfills every year.
Oh, wow.
148,000 tonnes. So that is, and the synthetic component of that, which is probably 80% wool, it'll take 1,000 years to break down, whereas the wool will just, decompose back into carbon and soil carbon over just a few years. So there's a huge environmental advantages through using wool, and actually other natural products that you can add to it, like hemp and harakiki, and so the natural fibres space is really exciting. I think we're going to see a real revival.
Is it an area that you think New Zealanders are aware of the potential of?
No, and I mentioned the harakiki thing because I think that that was obviously, if you go back 120 years or something, that was probably 150 years. It was a big industry here. They're now making carbon fibre Hayden Paddon's rally car, for example, is made out of harakiki. So it's carbon fibre replacement. It's stronger than and than the synthetic versions, and totally natural. So we're going to see a revival of a number of these industries, not just because of the environmental stuff, but actually some of the properties are superior to anything that we can manufacture synthetically.
That sounds amazing. I had no idea about the cars. That's brilliant. That is so cool.
Just to go on with that, apparently carbon fibre is a $2 trillion industry worldwide. You wouldn't have to get a big slice of that pie to have a really substantial industry re-emerge. There's an outfit called Kiwi Fibre in Christchurch. Go and have a look them up. They're doing some extraordinary stuff, and that's just a glimpse of what the future might hold.
So, last question for you then, and again, it's a really hard one for you. What's your record for shearing a sheep?
Well, I went to the New Zealand Shearing Champs on Saturday night, Tikawiti, and by crikey, I would have embarrassed myself up there. Those guys are incredible. Toa Henderson that won the open final, short 25 sheep in under 20 minutes. I might have knocked out a couple in that time, especially in my current state, and not particularly practiced. So there's several orders of magnitude between me and Toa Henderson.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really informative. I've really appreciated it.
Thanks, Paul, for the opportunity.
So yeah, that was the relatively woke sounding Mark Patterson, which is I really enjoyed it. I learned heaps.
I'm just going to say it now. What a class act he was.
Yeah, he was able to answer the questions. I was really impressed with the fact that I was expecting pushback on things like climate change and carbon emissions and stuff like that because it's New Zealand first. But he was very down to earth. He was very understandable. He had some great answers that were really, really good at explaining different perspectives. And I learned stuff from it. Like I said before, I love those interviews where I learn stuff. I had no idea about the race car thing. I had no idea about a whole bunch of the stuff that actually came up in that particular conversation. So I was really impressed. Really impressed.
I was blown away, especially at the fact that that he talked about the Hayden Paddon car and stuff like that. You know, and the fact that, as I said to you earlier in the week, off camera, how he mentioned, one of our previous interviews. So he obviously actually watches really, really classy.
Yeah, I was very impressed with that. And if there are any other government MPs, coalition MPs that want to come on the show, I do have a list of ones I won't interview, but you're more than welcome to find out if you're on that list. Flick us an email. I would really appreciate it. I don't really have much else to add other than the news.
I was just going to say that, I hope we get more because that just goes to show how classy, without all the lights and cameras and pressure, how down to earth our government MP can be. And one thing I will say to add to that is you can definitely tell why he supported the wage theft bill and got over the line for the Labour Party. He seems like a really dedicated man, and that really came through for me.
Well, I think that's because he knows if he doesn't do what he's told, he might get the cane again from the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
I think we might be the only democracy in the world where we can actually say one of our elected representatives was once hit with a cane by the Speaker.
Yeah. But what a class act. I just can't get over how classy he was.
Yeah. Right. Shall we jump into this week's The News?
We shall.
We can tell people about a couple of things we've got coming up.
We shall, yes.
All right. Let's do this. Hello there. Kia ora, and welcome to this week's The News. I'm Paul. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here emulating drag queen Scarlet Envy by asking, "Is it me? Am I the villain? I don't think I'm the villain," claimed this week that Labour and the Greens were quote-unquote playing politics by pointing out that 212 submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill wouldn't be entered into the official record in Parliament due to the sheer volume of responses, before caving and allowing it to go ahead on Thursday. That's right, the Prime Minister, who claimed he was a master negotiator before he caved to Seymour on forwarding the bill and allowing it to have the longest submission time while telling voters he didn't support it and it won't go anywhere, while also rushing unpopular and divisive policies through at breakneck speeds, is claiming others are playing politics by adhering to established practices within the parliamentary process. Late on Thursday evening, though, the government rescinded its decision and said it would allow submissions to be entered after it was pointed out that the committee was reporting back to the House a full month earlier than expected, allowing ample time to ensure the submissions became a matter of public record. On Friday, the Justice Select Committee made its formal recommendation that the Treaty Principles Bill be scrapped and not proceed. The committee received 307,000 submissions. Approximately 8% were in support of the bill, while 90% opposed and 2% had no definitive view. The committee report said it was clear that there was deep division over the bill, while a statistician from Victoria University said 90% of people telling David Seymour to take his divisive bill and fuck off seems pretty fucking unified to me. Genesis Energy has increased its imported coal stockpile to get through expected increased winter demand. Said a spokesperson for Genesis, "Sure, we had permission to build solar and wind infrastructure for years and haven't gone ahead with it, which would have alleviated reliance on polluting fossil fuels, but it's much easier to charge people an extra $10 a month to pay for that in the future than work with other gentailers to future-proof our energy supply." Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here trying to find out where in the small print it says there's no day service of alcohol on the train because he was sure that wasn't mentioned to him, has been getting louder in his calls to pull Aotearoa New Zealand out of the Paris Climate Accord, claiming that the country will be sending 22 to 23 billion to the United Nations to pay for it. The actual payments he's talking about are to offshore offset programs that would allow the country to transition to renewable energy options at a slower pace, so as not to shock the economy and impact GDP, and could be as low as 3 billion over 10 years if action was to begin into securing and negotiating contracts now. Said a spokesperson for Peter's office, "We know this is important to idiots that think woke is an insult and are the only voters who actually matter to us, so of course we're going to ignore facts and catastrophize the worst case scenario to keep them scared." After a week of making a big deal about Cabinet's decision to announce what they plan to do to build more supermarket competition, on Sunday Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here trying to emulate Toni Collette in Hereditary, announced that the plan was to make an official request for more information known as an RFI on what it would actually take to bring in a third supermarket company to the country. That's right, we had an announcement of an announcement about looking for more information to make a later announcement. Winston Peters, seen here thinking he spotted a rogue rainbow at the United Nations and wouldn't have a bar of it, wait, did someone say bar? Has come under fire from people with brains after publicly criticising the CEO of Kiwibank for answering questions about diversity support within his organisation. By supporting diversity within his organisation, Peters demanded in his latest sundown moment that the CEO should be focusing on the cost of living, like voters have been telling the government to do for 18 months, while Peters accepts petitions from TERFs, demands a COVID inquiry based on the crywanks of conspiracy peddlers, villainised trans people, removed REC from schools, removed an updated therapeutics bill designed to stop charlatans selling snake oil, and cried about the dangers of woke and DEI. Minister of Workplace Relations, Brooke Van Velden, seen here waiting for you to come home and find out what she left boiling on the stove in an oversized pot, has announced sweeping changes to health and safety rules, claiming that they're cutting red tape, which looks suspiciously like a safety rail. Their first target? Road cones, claiming there are simply too many of them and proposing a hotline to dob in excessive road cone usage. What happens after they're dobbed in is anyone's guess, but Minister Van Velden said that they'd be taken to that farm out in the country, you know, the one your dog went to when you were 9 and they were able to play with all the other road cones and be happy and not worried about the drain on finances and resources this will take to do when the public really just wanted some bloody action to bring down the ridiculously high prices that we all have to live with. After death threats made against Green MP member Benjamin Doyle were made this week, ACT Party leader David Seymour, seen here showing in the face he makes to scare off ghosts in a haunted mansion or low decile school, suggested the party report the threats to the mongrel mob, since last week the media blew out of proportion claims that they were calling for the abolition of the police. The Green Party has long held a stance that funding for some police services would be better spent on dealing with the drivers of crime, and David Seymour has long advocated people avoid going to the police when there are credible reports that shouldn't be ignored because of the harm that they can cause. Human Rights Commissioner Stephen Rainbow, seen here realising that a trans person won't get his job under the current government, has come under fire for anti-Muslim comments he made in a meeting with a diverse range of Jewish community leaders. The community leaders warned Rainbow that there is a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and conflating the two can lead to people unfairly combining the two or targeting other groups, to which Rainbow went on to incorrectly proclaim that the biggest threat to safety in Aotearoa was Muslim fundamentalism. The most recent threat assessment report from the NZSIS clearly states that identity-motivated violent extremism is the biggest risk, then expanding about the risks of white identity-motivated extremism. The head of NZSIS, Andrew Hampton, seen here being a really good spy, has said the comments misrepresent the assessment. Said Paul Goldsmith, the minister who hired Rainbow, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense now as to why Internal Affairs recommended against hiring this guy when I put his name on the list and overrode their calls. Oh well, what you gonna do?" This week saw a raft of changes to income support and tax, which will see the lowest wage earners on a minimum wage gain an extra $165 million in tax cuts, while landlords will be dealing with a lower than inflation rise in income. Oh, sorry, I got that the wrong way around. April 1 saw interest deductibility for landlords rise to 100%, meaning an extra $165 million in their pockets, while minimum wage earners got a 35-cent increase, well below the rate of inflation. On Thursday, US President Donald Trump, seen here out of breath from lifting an oversized novelty sign, announced a raft of new tariffs, one of which was a 10% tariff on New Zealand products. The United States became our second largest export destination last year, and this could cost exporters over $1 billion a year in lost revenue. Said a spokesperson for MPI, "We knew when we sent Winston over there a few weeks back it may cause some confusion, since he's so easily confused himself these days, but we can't work out how they rounded up a 2% tariff we charge on 25% of imported goods to a 20% general tariff," as the president said. But he is the president, so we can't say outright he's just plain incorrect that it'll upset his friends running the government. Even the bit about slapping a tariff on the herd in McDonald Islands, which is inhabited completely by penguins, is something that we're not allowed to talk about. In the House this week, Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here sitting at the grown-ups table for the first time, came under fire after refusing to acknowledge that abortion access was health care for women after it was revealed that some smaller hospitals were cutting back on women's health services. In response, Brown said, "It's only women's health care if it comes from the women's health care region of France." Of course I'm kidding, it's only health care if a conservative Christian male like myself says so. It was revealed by OIA this week that several Destiny Church groups, seen here overrunning a small community event and allegedly about to assault children they say they want to protect, had received over $40,000 in grants to raise awareness of COVID-19 within their communities, designed to help with health measures around the time of lockdowns. Despite openly telling his congregation and the public he was happy to kill a few of them by not following lockdown rules, the church accepted the donations. Said a spokesperson for Destiny Church, "Not only do we never face any consequences, we're quite happy to scam the government and public along the way as well to maximise profits, to help our legal funds to defend actual child molesters in our church." The Ministry of Social Development has revealed that it is currently declining 31% of all emergency housing applications, claiming it was because people had contributed or caused their immediate need for the housing. In March of 2023, it was declining just 3% of applications. Housing advocates, Aviva, formerly known as the Christchurch Women's Refuge, the Salvation Army and the Community Law Society all pointed out that both circumstance and evidence points to some cruel decision-making processes in places that impact those fleeing domestic violence or finding themselves without accommodation. Said Louise Upston, Minister for Social Development, seen here describing the size of the pot you should leave boiling in someone's house to really freak them out. Nuh-uh. If people are fleeing a domestic violence situation and need emergency help, then they should have thought about that before they got themselves into that situation. Staff were left in tears at Kāinga Ora this week after it was announced that the organisation was going to be looking to fire 16% of its workforce in restructuring to pay for tobacco company kickbacks and ferry build cancellation fees. While the Public Service Association has acknowledged it's going to impact the work the agency does, Housing Minister Chris Bishop, seen here losing all hope that the old SingStar microphones will still work, pointed out that with less social housing builds and for some really weird reason a huge drop in demand for emergency housing, there's just no need to have staff on to help people anymore. Māori Development Minister Tama Pōtaka, seen here trying to find out if the rumours that pens have candy-filled centres are true, has announced a raft of new appointments to work with a number of organisations tasked with helping the continued revitalisation of Te Reo Māori. These include Te Tura Whiri e Te Reo Māori, the Māori Language Commission, Te Matawai funding body Te Mangai Pāho, and Whakaapa Māori. Most surprisingly, not one of the appointments was an old white guy who's openly criticised Māori and supported the government for its anti-Māori actions. And finally, the country has been lashed this week by wild weather over the past 48 hours, leading to flooding, power cuts, cancelled ferries, and a crash on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Said one Beach Haven resident, no internet, no power, just some quiet time with a good book, without the everyday onslaught of crazy, cruel and stupid that's become a part of daily lives. Honestly, it's the best mental health I've felt in a very long time. Well, that's this week's The News. Thanks for watching. Look after yourself. See you next time. There we go. News all done and dusted. There's a question that's actually been popping up in here about the Louise Upston comment about whether or not she actually did say you should have planned ahead for these things. What she actually said was more along the lines of you should be checking to see if there are other alternatives before you come to WINZ and ask for help. You need to plan ahead in that way, not plan ahead and you should know about domestic violence beforehand. Just to clarify, just to explain the joke.
Before we go, did you want to give some updates or?
Yeah. So, who's the person from Consumer New Zealand that we're talking to next week?
John Duffy.
John Duffy. So, you're CEO of Consumer New Zealand?
I don't know what his role is, but he used to be the head of NetSafe, and now he does consumer.
Brilliant. So that'll be a pre-record that we do with him. And then live next week, we've got Green MP Dr. Lawrence Junan joining us. We're going to be talking education. I had a quick catch up with Lawrence this afternoon before he flew down to Otautahi Christchurch for Armageddon. He's doing the Armageddon circuit this year. So we're going to be talking particularly around education, the new English curriculum that's been announced over the last couple of weeks, and how something like the Treaty Principles Bill might end up being an opportunity to help better educate some people around the country's history as it actually happened, as opposed to the whitewash version that we've seen in the past. So yeah, it should be really fascinating.
Yeah, and we can't talk about any of the other stuff. So before anyone asks.
No, but I'm going to break some news for you. I'm going to be taking a couple of weeks off in July because I'm going to see tarsiers, which has probably got people wondering what the hell that is. The little monkeys with the big eyes. I'm going to go to a tarsier rehabilitation, and they basically it's the only successful breeding program for tarsiers anywhere in the world. I'm off to see those in July. It's going to be amazing.
Yes, hopefully it won't be too hot this time like last time.
Well, it's a tropical country, but that's what the tarsiers like. Tarsiers? I honestly don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but they are so cute.
Yeah, so that will be fun. Make sure you get lots of footage.
Of course. Absolutely. Definitely. Right. If that's that, then I think we should wrap up. Let everyone go grab a drink and do everything else they need to do before they sit down and watch BHN or whatever else they want to watch.
Yes, indeed. We'll be back with you next week.
Yeah. So live long, prosper, be one with the force. And I'll catch you guys all next time.